Walter Hayes, an 82-year-old man, adjusted the cuffs of his white shirt beneath his gray wool blazer as the train hissed to a stop at Union Station in Washington, D.C. His slacks, freshly pressed but slightly loose at the waist, hung on his frame, and his shoes gleamed with a polish he'd applied that morning. Not for anyone else, but because it mattered to him. He rose slowly, gripping his worn leather bag, and a woman across the aisle, perhaps in her late 30s, offered a kind smile. "Visiting family, sir?" she asked politely. Walter returned a small smile. "No, ma'am. A friend's funeral." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, adjusted his gray felt hat, and turned toward the exit. No need for more words. Not today. The cool morning air greeted him on the platform, carrying diesel, coffee, and the faint sweetness of a vendor cart. The city buzzed, alive and loud, but Walter wasn't here for that. His steps were slow, his gait stiff yet steady. Decades of mopping floors at Jefferson High School in Birmingham had worn his joints. 43 years without a missed day, except the week his wife passed. Now it was just him, no kids, no siblings, just memories. In the taxi line, a young man in a green hoodie cut ahead. Walter said nothing, waiting his turn. When it came, he gave the driver the address for Arlington National Cemetery. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, chewing gum. "Big service today. 3-star general. Gonna be packed." Walter nodded. Yes. He was a good man. The driver didn't press, just drove, music low, windows cracked. Walter stared out, thoughts drifting to Montgomery Road into Tuskegee, where he and James Carver first met in '49. One, the preacher's son, the other, a kid from the mill houses. They played stickball, fought over nothing, shared watermelon on sweltering days. In '67, they went to war together. Only one came home with medals. Walter never cared about the brass. It was the bond that counted. The taxi stopped near the south gate of the cemetery. Walter paid with the $20 and stepped out, eyeing rows of cars and men in uniform standing at attention. A long black hearse waited ahead, white chairs neatly lined under a green canopy. He paused, adjusted his collar, and pulled an envelope from his blazer pocket. In neat cursive, it read, "Mr. Walter Hayes, please escort to front. Sincerely, Margaret Carver." His heart felt steady but heavy as he walked toward the entrance, alone, unnoticed, carrying decades of quiet history. At the gate, a young officer, crisp in dress blues, stood with another, both scanning guests with cool detachment. Walter nodded politely and held out the envelope. "Morning, sirs. I'm here for General Carver's service." His wife said to show this. The shorter officer took it, squinted at the writing, then glanced at Walter with a tight, forced smile. "Sir, do you have your name on the official list?" Walter shook his head. "I was told this would do. I knew the general. Served with him." The taller officer leaned over, read the note, then looked up. "We need to verify names to the master list. Orders from the family liaison." Walter stayed calm, his voice carrying a quiet weight. "I came a long way. Just want to pay respects. That man meant the world to me." The younger officer shifted, uneasy. "I hear you, sir, but without clearance, we can't let you in. High-level event. It's not personal." Walter looked past them to the seats filling fast, a bugler warming up in the distance. He took off his hat, held it to his chest. "I'm not here to cause trouble. That man back there," he pointed toward the hearse. "I pulled him out of a rice field with a hole in his chest. Ain't trying to steal nobody's seat." They didn't budge. "I'm sorry, sir," the tall one said. Walter stepped back, eyes dropping to the pavement. A couple passed, whispering, glancing at him before moving on. He leaned against the stone wall, knees aching, sweat beading under the rising sun. He wiped it with a handkerchief, then pulled out a faded photo. Two young men, muddy, smiling in fatigues, James with an arm around his shoulder, laughing like the world wasn't burning around them. Walter folded it away, still waiting, still invisible. Walter Hayes stood by the stone wall near the south gate of Arlington National Cemetery, the envelope from Margaret Carver still in his pocket, his hope fading as the funeral of General James Carver began without him. His mind drifted back, the hum of the crowd and the distant bugle pulling him to a day in June 1968, deep in the jungles of Con Tum Province, South Vietnam. The air was thick, loud with cracking branches, distant shouts, and the staccato of gunfire bouncing off trees. Mud clung to everything, boots, fatigues, even Walter's bones. He crouched behind a tree stump, rifle gripped tight, eyes scanning the smoke ahead. His chest heaved, sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't blink. Their platoon, on a routine recon mission, had stumbled into an ambush. Chaos erupted, plans shattered. "James!" Walter shouted over the gunfire. "You got eyes on the ridge?" James Carver, then just Lieutenant Carver, ducked low beside him, blood seeping from his shoulder, helmet lost, dirt smeared across his jaw. "Negative," he grunted. "We're boxed in. Radio's dead." Walter cursed under his breath, glancing back. Two soldiers lay prone, unmoving. He couldn't check if they breathed. Bullets ripped through the air, and James winced as a round grazed his thigh, collapsing hard. Weiter achtet fast. He grabbed James by the collar, dragging him behind a fallen tree. "You stay with me, you hear?" Walter said, breathless but steady. "You don't tap out on me today." James grimaced, trying to sit up. "Go, just go. I'll slow you down." Walter ignored him. He yanked a smoke grenade from James's vest, pulled the pin, and tossed it toward the tree line where enemy fire raged. Purple smoke bloomed, a brief shield. Walter hauled James over his shoulder, legs burning, heart pounding, and ran low and fast. Bullets whizzed past, but he didn't stop until they hit a shallow trench, tangled brush hiding them. He lowered James gently, hands slick with blood, some his, some not. James coughed, eyes wide. "You're crazy, Hayes." "You're damn lucky I am." Walter shot back, checking the wound. The gunfire eased as their unit pushed back, reinforcements breaking the ambush. Walter stayed by James's side the whole ride to base, pressing the wound, talking, making him laugh even as breathing hurt. After that, James called him my shadow. Never in public, though. Back in Alabama, they rarely spoke of the war, not because they couldn't, but because folks only saw James in uniform, only his name in the papers. On James's visits home, he'd stop by Walter's porch, sometimes with a bottle, sometimes just to sit, cicadas humming. Con Tum stayed there as a quiet story. James once tried to push a medal for Walter. "I didn't carry you out for a medal," Walter had laughed. "I did it because I wasn't letting your loud mouth die in that swamp." James grinned, and that was that. Back at the cemetery, Walter snapped out of the memory. The sun beat down, sweat beading on his brow. He wiped it away, still leaning against the wall. The envelope from Margaret shone thrice with no luck. Guests streamed past, men and women in black, officers with polished medals, kids clutching hands, all with badges, passes, names on the list. None glanced his way. A black SUV rolled up, 3 high-ranking officers stepping out, shaking hands with the liaison, ushered through fast. The chaplain's voice rose under the green canopy, the service starting. Walter stepped to the gate again, urgency in his tone. "Sir," he tapped a junior officer's shoulder, "I came because General Carver asked me to." "This envelope's from his wife. We've known each other 70 years. The officer nodded stiffly, uneasy. "We're sorry, Mr. Hayes. Strict protocol. I can't make that call. Is the family liaison here?" "Margaret. She's inside the perimeter. We can't pull her out." Walter stepped back, deflated. The answer wasn't just no. It was no one would try. Chairs filled. A man in a dark green uniform strode past, important like everyone today. Walter's chest burned, not from pride, but something deeper. He pulled out the envelope again, opening it slowly. Inside, a note on cream stationery. "Walter, if you decide to come, please show this to any staff member. James would want you sitting with us. Always, Margaret." He folded it, tucked it away. He could have sat on the curb, could have left, but that wasn't him. From his bag, he drew a faded green armband, folded tight, JC stitched in fishing line. James's gift after Con Tum. "Wear that," James had said. "If I don't make it, part of me's still with you." Walter slipped it on his wrist, trembling slightly, still unnoticed. The prayer began. The eulogy hummed over speakers, and Walter stood, eyes to the ground, willing his quiet anger to stay buried. Walter Hayes stood by the stone wall at Arlington National Cemetery, the faded green armband with JC stitched in fishing line snug on his wrist, the weight of decades pressing on his shoulders. The chaplain's voice carried over the loudspeakers, the service for General James Carver underway, and still, Walter remained outside, unseen by the crowd of suits, dresses, and polished metals. His knees ached, the sun burned his neck, but he held the envelope from Margaret Carver, his hope flickering like a candle in the wind. Minutes ticked by. A woman in black brushed past, perfume trailing, a child in shiny shoes bouncing behind her. Walter's eyes drifted to the green canopy, where James's casket rested beneath an American flag, wreaths framing it, a photo from his last tour nearby. He tried once more, approaching a young soldier with a clipboard. "Son," he said softly, holding out the envelope. "I served with the general. This is from his wife." The soldier read it, offered a half-smile. "Let me check with the list coordinator." He vanished inside the gate. 10 minutes passed. No one returned. Walter shifted his weight, still waiting, still invisible. The crowd settled. The eulogy droned on, and he felt the sting of being left behind, not for lack of trying, but for lack of a name on a list. Then something shifted. From afar into the field, beyond the seated rows and standing guests, a tall figure in full uniform moved toward the south gate. His pace was steady, deliberate, not rushed but purposeful. The 3 silver stars on each shoulder gleamed in the sunlight. Lieutenant General Edward Grayson, a man known in military circles for cutting through noise with action, earning respect by giving it up, down, and sideways. He stopped by a staff sergeant near the center aisle. "Who's the man outside the gate?" he asked, voice clear, pointing to Walter, still as stone, dust speckling his gray blazer. The sergeant stammered. "We weren't given clearance, sir." Security said. Grayson raised a hand. No anger, just finality. "Hold the ceremony." The chaplain's voice faded mid-sentence as Grayson turned, striding past confused guests, generals, colonels, and civilians. His boots hit the pavement with a rhythm that silenced murmurs. The 2 junior officers at the gate snapped to attention. "General Grayson, sir," one began, but he ignored them, stopping just short of Walter. He looked him over, not just the blazer, the weathered hands, or the tired eyes, but something deeper. "Sir," Grayson said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "what is your name?" Walter stepped forward, voice catching but steady. "Walter Hayes. Since I was 9, I knew General Carver. Served with him, Quantum, 1968. Grayson nodded once, then raised his right hand, firm and proud, delivering a full military salute. Not a gesture, but a true one. Walter blinked, stunned. Grayson lowered his hand. "Mr. Hayes, would you allow me the honor of escorting you to your seat?" Walter opened his mouth, words failing, and nodded. Grayson offered his arm. They walked together, shoulder to shoulder, down the path toward the service. The crowd fell silent. Every head turned, every eye watched. A junior officer stepped aside, nearly dropping his clipboard. As they neared the front row, Margaret Carver stood, eyes welling with tears. "I told you he'd come," she whispered, voice trembling, taking Walter's hand and squeezing gently. General Grayson turned to the chaplain, nodding quietly. "You may continue." He took his seat, eyes on Walter, a man who saw beyond protocol to something greater. Walter lowered himself slowly into the empty chair beside Margaret, adjusting his blazer, sitting straight. Not for show, but respect. The seat was his, save not by lists, but by those who knew what mattered. Margaret rested her hand on his, light but steady, a quiet anchor. The chaplain resumed, speaking of duty, legacy, honor. Walter barely heard, his gaze fixed on the flag-draped casket, James's photo beside it. Gray hair, steady eyes, that stubborn chin. He didn't know half the front row, but it didn't matter. None had pulled James from a trench in Vietnam, bullets flying, or sat with him in a tent, passing a bottle, dreaming of home. A memory flickered. Years after the war, a cold Alabama morning, James on Walter's porch with a toolbox. "What's that for?" Walter asked. James shrugged. Heard your water heater's acting up. Walter grinned. You a general or a plumber? You're damn plumber today, James replied, kneeling to fix it like it was nothing. That was the man, not medals, not salutes, but a friendship spanning 60 years, needing no spotlight. Margaret leaned over, whispering, He wrote you something days before he passed. She slipped a sealed envelope from her bag. No stamp, just Walter Hayes in James's bold scrawl. Walter took it, eyes tracing the letters, but he waited, holding it close, not ready yet to face his friend's final words. Walter Hayes sat in the front row at Arlington National Cemetery, the flag-draped casket of General James Carver before him, Margaret Carver's hand resting lightly on his. The chaplain's words of duty and honor faded into the background as Walter's mind drifted, the envelope from James tucked in his pocket, unopened. The photo by the casket, James's gray hair, steady eyes, stubborn chin, stared back, a reminder of the boy he'd known, the man he'd saved. The service pressed on. A Marine stepped forward, folding the flag into a crisp triangle, handing it to Margaret. She didn't look at the officer. Her eyes turned to Walter. With trembling hands, she passed it to him. James wanted you to have it, she said. Walter tried to protest, but she shook her head firm. He took it carefully, holding it to his chest like something sacred, its weight heavy with memory. The crowd thinned after the final prayer. Rifle salutes echoing through the hills, the bugle's last note lingering like a held breath. Walter stayed seated, the flag in his lap, hands steady but tight. Margaret squeezed his hand once more, then rose to greet others. Walter waited, alone now, until the chatter faded and the chairs emptied. He stood, tucking the letter in his pocket, the flag under his arm, and walked to the casket. Sunlight hit the wood, the draped flag vivid against the muted greens and grays. Walter rested a hand on the edge, closed his eyes, and breathed deep. I know I ain't supposed to speak, he said, voice steady, loud enough for the few lingering nearby. But I need to say something. Not for the general, not even for his family, for me. He stepped closer, hat in hand. I knew James Carver before y'all called him sir, before medals, politics, speeches. He was just James to me. The boy who stole my lunch twice, gave it back both times 'cause he felt bad. A few smiled softly. Walter glanced at General Edward Grayson, still seated, watching quietly. I carried him once, bleeding out, cussing me the whole way. And he carried me, too. Not in the mud, maybe, but in ways that matter. He paused, eyes on the casket. I got told I didn't belong here, wasn't on no list, just some old man. And I am. But I was James's brother, too. I'm proud of that. He raised his hand, a slow salute. Not crisp, elbow wavering, fingers off but full of mud, sweat, and years. A voice cut through. Detail, attention. General Grayson stood, facing the casket, his salute sharp and flawless. Present arms. Across the field, nearly 24 soldiers, officers, lieutenants, a young cadet, snapped to attention, hands rising in unison, not for protocol, but for a man worth honoring. Walter froze, caught between pride and the weight of it all, feeling for the first time like he belonged. Grayson dropped his hand, the others followed. He stepped forward, no fuss, extending a hand. Mr. Hayes, he said, quiet but clear, thank you for your service to this country and to General Carver. Walter shook it firm once. You honored him today, Grayson added. More than any words I've heard. Walter nodded. He honored me long before this. The general stepped back as the crowd dispersed, cemetery staff folding chairs in respectful silence. Walter sat on a low stone ledge, flag close, knees aching but ignored. He leaned forward, eyes on the casket. I told myself I wouldn't talk too long, he muttered soft to himself, but I guess that ship sailed. He cleared his throat, speaking to James now. You remember that summer in '55 when you broke your arm climbing that water tower behind Wilson's farm? I told you the ladder was rusted. You never listened. He chuckled, then quieted. I still see your mama's face when we walk back, me dragging you, you crying like a fool. She just gave me a cold rag, pointed to the porch. Walter looked across the white stones dotting the hillside. I never said it right, Probably because I didn't know how. I loved you like my own blood, James. You weren't just a friend. You were family. His voice cracked. I thought we'd go out together, gray and slow, arguing whose knees were worse, who forgot the fishing poles. He pulled a thin chain from his pocket, James's dog tags, given in 1970 before a redeployment. Walter ran his thumb over the metal, crouched carefully, and set them on the casket. Time to go back where they belong. I'll carry what's left of us, like always. Whatever you thought you owed me, you paid it. Every visit, every call, every time you let me sit and be seen. Walter clasped his hands, eyes closed. Lord, thank you for letting me know this man, for letting us grow old, even if not together, and for letting him rest with someone who remembered who he really was. The wind rustled leaves, a bird called and flew off. Walter gave the casket one last look, then turned, slow and sure, walking down the paved road, past empty chairs, each step steady, grounded. Walter Hayes walked slowly away from the casket of General James Carver, the folded flag tucked under his arm, James's dog tags left behind on the wood, a final offering. The Arlington hillside was quiet now, the ceremony over, chairs stacked, and cars rolling away. Cemetery staff worked in respectful silence, giving Walter space as he moved down the paved road, each step heavy but sure. The weight of the day pressed on his knees, yet he carried on, the letter from James still unread in his pocket, a quiet promise to face later. A week later, back in Birmingham, Walter knelt on the front porch of a neighbor's house, the sun blazing down. The door stuck at the top, and he'd promised to fix it. Armed with a screwdriver, wood filler, and a creaky folding stool, he worked steadily. Mr. Walter, you sure you want to do that in this heat? The woman asked from the doorway, holding out a glass of lemonade. I'm already here, he replied, not looking up. Ain't no point waiting till it gets worse. He took the lemonade, sipped once, and returned to the task. That's how he'd always been, quiet, steady, showing up. The funeral felt distant, like another life, until the woman's son raced down the steps, phone in hand. Mr. Walter, you're on the internet. Walter blinked. I'm what? The boy turned the screen. Grainy footage of Lieutenant General Edward Grayson crossing the cemetery, stopping at the gate, saluting Walter. The crowd hushed. Over 1 million views, the title bold. 3-star general stops entire funeral for a stranger. But Walter wasn't a stranger. He watched a moment, then handed the phone back. That's something. The boy looked puzzled. You're not excited? Walter smiled faintly. That wasn't for the cameras, son. Just a man doing right by another. Inside his home, the flag sat in a glass case a cousin had brought, the letter and photos from the funeral on the kitchen table. Calls came, reporters, veterans groups, a podcast producer for California, all saying the moment deserved to be heard. Walter's answer stayed the same. I already said what I needed to. One morning, he sat at the dining table with a pen and envelope. He wrote simply, General Grayson, thank you for stopping, for looking me in the eye, for not needing proof. I didn't expect what you did, but I won't forget it. You saw me, and you saw James in me. That's enough. Walter Hayes. He mailed it the next day, no return address. Life rolled on. Walter fixed a window screen for the widower across the street, volunteered at the high school library, shelving books, sometimes dozing in the reading chair. At the grocery store, folks approached. You're that man from the funeral, they'd say. He'd nod, shake a hand, say little. The whole story stayed untold. Not for lack of want, but because some things lived fullest between two people and one was gone. Weeks later, walking past a small park, Walter spotted a young man in uniform on a bench, restless, maybe pre-deployment. Walter sat beside him, hands on his cane, silent. After a moment, the soldier glanced over. You that guy from Arlington? Walter just smiled. The young man nodded. My granddad showed me the video. Said that's how men used to carry themselves. Walter exhaled, gazing at the trees. We just tried not to forget each other. They sat in quiet, the bond needing no words. When Walter rose to go, the soldier stood, saluting. No crowd, no camera, just respect. Walter tipped his hat in return. In the end, it was never about recognition. Not for Walter, not for James. It was about showing up, keeping promises, being seen when it counted. Walter walked on, steady as ever, carrying the weight of a friendship that needed no headlines, hoping maybe he'd reminded a few what honor still looked like. If this moved you, tell someone who deserves to be remembered. If you've got a Walter in your life, someone who's walked beside you in the quiet, let them know today. Walter Hayes continued his slow walk through the streets of Birmingham, the memory of General James Carver a steady presence in his heart, the folded flag from Arlington now a quiet fixture in his home. Days blended into weeks. The viral video of Lieutenant General Edward Grayson's salute fading from the buzz of the internet, but its echo lingered in small ways. Neighbors nodded with new respect, a quiet pride in their eyes, though Walter never sought it. He carried on as always, fixing, helping, being there. One crisp morning, Walter sat on his porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The air smelled of dew and cut grass, and the street was calm, kids not yet out, cars humming distantly. He pulled James's letter from his pocket, the one Margaret Carver had given him at the funeral, its edges soft from handling. He'd read it a dozen times, but each pass felt like hearing James's voice again. Unfolding it, he traced the scrawl. Walter, if you're reading this, I made it where you can't follow. Not yet. I tried writing this a few times, kept starting over. How do you write to the one man who knew you before the uniform, stuck around after the medals lost their shine? Walter swallowed, eyes lingering. I think of Quantum more than I admit. Not because I almost died, but because I learned something. You don't need rank to save a life, a title to be a brother. Just care more for someone than yourself. You did that, for your community, your students, for me. I never said it, but when I made Brigadier, they let me pick someone for my ceremony pin. I almost chose my mentor, but I thought of you, laughing in the rain, bullets cracking past, and no one earned it more. I didn't have the guts to make it public. I'm sorry, Walter. His jaw tightened. If I've got one regret, it's not shouting your name louder. You were the bravest I ever met. I hope Margaret gets you to the front row. Remember this. I don't care who's watching, you matter to me, always. Your brother, James. Walter folded it slow, resting it against his knee, letting the words settle, keeping James close. A pickup rolled by, and old Mr. Thompson from down the street waved. Morning, Walter. Fix my gate yet? Walter chuckled, lifting a hand. This afternoon, I promise. He'd been in it still, patching screens, tightening hinges, shelving books at Jefferson High. A letter arrived that week, postmarked from D.C., simple and direct. Mr. Hayes, your words reached me. I saw a man who carried honor without needing a uniform. Thank you for reminding me what service means. Respectfully, Edward Grayson. Walter tucked it beside James's, no reply needed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Walter walked to the community center, a place he'd helped clean for years. Kids played basketball, teens laughed by the steps. A young woman, maybe 20, approached shy. Mr. Hayes? I'm Lisa. My dad showed me that video from the funeral. He said you and the general were like family. Walter nodded, eyes soft. We were miss. Grew up together, got through tough times. She smiled. He said you're why he tells us to look out for each other. I'm joining the Army next month. Want to be that kind of person. Walter's chest warmed. You already are, Lisa. Just keep showing up for folks. She beamed, then ran off to her friends. He watched, leaning on his cane, feeling James in the moment. Not in medals or crowds, but in this a quiet ripple. Back home, Walter sat at his table, the flag in its case, photos and letters nearby. He didn't need the world to know his story. James had, and that was enough. But as he looked out the window, stars pricking the sky, he hoped maybe he'd nudged a few to remember. Honor isn't in the spotlight. It's in the promises kept, the hands extended, the quiet walks beside a friend. Walter sipped his coffee, smiled faintly, and carried on, steady as ever, James's shadow still at his side. Walter Hayes rose early in Birmingham, the morning light filtering through his curtains, painting the kitchen table where General James Carver's folded flag rested in its glass case. The letters, James's final words, and Lieutenant General Edward Grayson's reply sat neatly beside it, a quiet testament to a bond in a day that had rippled beyond Arlington. Walter, now 82, moved slower, but his purpose held firm. He grabbed his toolbox, a worn leather bag, and headed out, the air cool and sharp with the promise of a new day. Down the street, Ms. Ellie Parker waved from her porch, her mailbox dangling loose from its post. "Walter, you still fixing things for us old folks?" she called, a grin in her voice. He tipped his hat. "Long as I'm standing, Ms. Ellie." He set to work, screwdriver steady, tightening bolts, the ache in his knees a familiar companion. A neighbor's boy, Jamal, maybe 12, lingered nearby, watching. "You're the guy from the video, right?" "With the general?" Walter glanced over, nodding. "That's me, son." Jamal's eyes widened. "My teacher showed us. Said you're a hero." Walter chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "No hero, just a friend who showed up. You look after your people, that's what counts." Jamal nodded, thoughtful, then ran off to play. Walter finished the mailbox, took a sip of water Ellie offered, and moved on. The day stretched, helping a widower clear a clogged gutter, sorting books at Jefferson High's library, where students whispered his name, tying him to that viral moment. One afternoon, a letter arrived, the envelope plain but official. Inside, a note from Lisa, the young woman from the community center. "Mr. Hayes, I'm at basic training now. Thinking of you and General Carver keeps me going. I want to serve like you did, quiet, strong for others. Thank you, Lisa." Walter smiled, tucking it with the others. He didn't write back. Words weren't his way. But he felt the thread of James's legacy weaving through her, through Jamal, through the kids who watched him now. Weeks later, at the grocery store, a man in a veteran's cap approached, hand outstretched. "Saw you at Arlington, Mr. Hayes. I serve in Nam too. What you did for Carver, standing tall, that's the real stuff. Me and the boys at the VFW talk about you." Walter shook his hand, steady. "Just said goodbye to my brothers, sir. Glad you saw it." The man nodded, eyes bright, and left Walter to his cart, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. That evening, Walter sat on his porch, the cicadas humming like they had when James visited. He held James's letter, rereading the line, "You matter to me always. Your brother, James." The words anchored him. He looked out at the street, kids biking, neighbors chatting, and saw his life's work. Not in medals or headlines, but in the doors he fixed, the kids he guided, the friend he carried through war and time. A young couple walked by, pausing. "Mr. Hayes, you're famous around here," the woman said, smiling. "We heard about the funeral, how you honored your friend." Walter tipped his hat. "Wasn't about fame, ma'am. Just keeping a promise." They nodded, moved on, and Walter leaned back, the sky bruising purple. He thought of James, stickball days, war's chaos, porch silences, and knew he'd carried him still, not just in Contum, but here now. Walter rose, slow but sure, and went inside. He set his toolbox by the door, ready for tomorrow's tasks. The flag gleamed in its case, a silent vow. He'd keep showing up, for neighbors, for kids, for James, because that's what brothers did. And maybe, just maybe, he lit a spark for others to carry the torch of honor, loyalty, and quiet love, one steady step at a time.